Good morning, everyone. We are so thrilled that you're joining us this morning. It is the last week of March. How is that even possible? So we're in the home stretch in terms of helping students take that next step to prepare for their education beyond high school. So I am excited to have you here. I am your host for the morning, Kathy Hastings McDonald. I'm the Associate Director for Outreach with the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. And a few housekeeping items just to get us started. We welcome your questions, so please send those over anytime. You can throw them in the chat, you can throw them in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on both. And we definitely want to hear what's on your mind and how we can help you. So don't be bashful there. And to get you started, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, what part of the state are you dialing in from today? We'd love to know where folks are calling in from, so we get a sense of who are out there. Sometimes it can feel weird, like we're talking into the void. So let us know where you're calling in from. Excuse me. Second, share what you're learning on social media. We love to see what is resonating with you and to encourage friends of yours to learn more about all of this process of FAFSA and how to pay for college. And finally, we will be are recording this session, so no worries there. We will make the recording available along with the slides after we're done today. So if you registered, you will get both. Okay, so very briefly, this webinar is being brought to you by the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. We are the state agency that helps North Carolina pay for their education, and we are so pleased to bring you the CFNC.org website, where you can go for really everything you need to know about the college going process. Both you as a college access professional guiding your students, and your students and families themselves can go there for lots of great information, tools, and tips. So quick introduction to get us started here, just a brief reminder to remind students and parents that there's three main ways to pay for college: family funds, financial aid, and gap funding. And no surprise, financial aid makes up for many families the broad majority of how they go about paying for college. A quick snapshot of how are we doing. As of March 17th, the state has over 47,000 completed FAFSAs, which is great to see. Those are students who are intending to continue their education after high school. 43% of public high school seniors have completed a FAFSA. And I say public high school not to leave out our private high school audience members. We just don't have your senior total, so we can't complete a rate. But we know you're working hard to get your students ready for life after high school. So that completion rate is up about 2,500 completed applications versus last year, which is a growth rate of 5.8%. And you'll see in red the thing to draw your attention to, which is important this time of year. We have 3,400 submitted but not completed FAFSAs. That's a great place to focus some of your attention this time of year, because those are students who clearly intended to go to college. They've started the FAFSA process but haven't quite finished that. So if you can use the second tool, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can find out which one of your students are doing that. Okay, a quick reminder of the two North Carolina FAFSA tools. Our guest speaker is going to talk more about those in a minute, but just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the NC FAFSA tracker has now moved to the CFNC.org website. You can see the shortened URL there. We're so appreciative of My Future NC for being the champion in creating a FAFSA tracker in the state, and we are also thrilled to now be hosting it along with all of the other FAFSA tools on our CFNC website. And the second tool is the Finish the FAFSA tool, and these tools work together. So the FAFSA tracker allows your principal and other education stakeholders to kind of keep that weekly pulse of how submissions and completions are doing, offer more support where it's needed. The Finish the FAFSA allows you to look at that student level FAFSA completion information. And that's updated every business day. So you can see which students have started but maybe haven't completed and who might need more help. So with that, I am thrilled to turn it over to our dear friend, Devin McCarthy James, who is a CFNC representative and a wonderful partner of ours. She's going to share all kinds of great tools, resources, and tips for you to make this FAFSA final push a success. So with that, Devin, I'm thrilled to welcome you this morning.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm excited to be here. Actually, I think, Kathy, if you could try and enable the chat, it looked like maybe the chat wasn't allowing everybody to put their feedback in, and I would love for folks to be able to collaborate during this session. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides while we're doing that. Hopefully, y'all can see those. So before we dive too far in, let me just tell you a little bit about me so you know who I am and where how I approach FAFSA and sort of this end of year for our graduating seniors. So I am a former high school teacher and school counselor at the high school level for about 12 years. And then I've been in this role for the last a little over 3 years. And so I try to bring a lot of my former experience within the public school systems into this role. And one of my very favorite things about this role is not just helping students and families understand this process still, but also really trying to support school counselors, college access staff, and really try to help behind the scenes those of you that are really on the front lines. One of my favorite things is going around and hearing all of these amazing things that y'all are doing in the schools. So that is one thing that I would really encourage you to do as we're talking about some of these things. None of us knows every single possibility or every single partner group out there. So I would really encourage y'all to share things in the chat. I want this to be sort of an immersive experience for y'all, and I would love to hear some of the things that you all are doing in your areas or ideas that you have to implement in your areas. So what we're talking about today is sort of this final push, right? We know we have students in our schools for, just a couple of short months at this point, right? And there's a lot going on. And so we really want to talk now before things get so wild. We know that graduation takes up a lot of counselors' time and energy. So before we get to that point, are there ways we can be intentional with data, with interventions, with getting supports out there and next steps. So, what can we do now and how can we support students once we are no longer seeing them day to day in the school? So what can we do to kind of help carry them forward as well? So first, let's talk about a little bit of the reminders of the reasons, right? We're going to share these slides with you. So if this is helpful to you, if this data is helpful to you, by all means, share this with your community partners, with your students, with those families. So first, education does pay. I know that sometimes folks are, a little skeptical about that investment, but the research shows that it actually pays better than even the stock market. So, it's something to consider that, definitely that investment of time, energy, and of course money can be something that really pays off not only personally, but also financially. I'm so sorry, something happened to my computer there. There we go. So we know that that can pay off. It's clicking me over, I apologize. It's always something with technology. There we go. And those higher earnings lead to higher average net worth, right? So, it's not only that annual consideration of what you make in a year, but over time, it leads to families being more secure financially, right? Having those savings, building generational wealth, breaking some of those low income patterns, right? That we know can be so tough for families. So that's, one of those big picture items. And of course, there are exceptions. I think a lot of times we talk about FAFSA and we talk about education and going to college. And some folks are like, well, no, but I can make money at doing this, that, or the other thing. Yes, of course, there are definitely pathways that don't require a bachelor's degree or don't even require an associate's degree that can pay, but those tend to be the exceptions, not the rule, right? So we still want to make sure we're supporting college access. I'm not saying we need to force everybody to go to college, but we want to support those who might find it useful, who think they might want to do something that requires that college education, but maybe don't know how to access the funding to get there, right? So that's what we're really talking about here. And the bigger thing that I hear more and more post-recession, a little while back, and then of course in COVID, one of the big things that has really come to light recently is not just the income benefits of having that post-secondary education, but also having a job, right? So we found that having more education tends to be one of the driving factors to being able to find another job if you've lost a job due to an economic downturn or other circumstances. So that having a job, the being less likely to be unemployed, is also a real benefit that I think we need to talk about more. It just creates a job security that obviously can benefit students and families for years to come. And of course, we know, though, that affordability is that big barrier, right? We know that there's other barriers, but this tends to be the financial piece is what I hear over and over from students, from families. They're just not sure where that money is going to come from, how they can access that. So it really becomes very important for us as, caring education professionals to try and get that information out there as best we can to support those students and families however we can to help them access those funds. So 4 out of 5 college students do rely on some combination of aid, of financial aid to go to college. So oftentimes we hear, families saying, oh, we're not going to get anything, but that's not necessarily true, right? Sometimes you just kind of got to get on the wheel and see what happens, right? See what things you might be eligible for in need-based or merit-based aid, because we know that a lot of students are having that experience. So it's more rare to not receive some kind of aid than to receive aid to go to college. But unfortunately, we have a lot of North Carolina high school seniors that are leaving a lot of, that free money on the table, which is, one of those big things that I want students to know, that they can get some money that is free, right? That they won't have to necessarily pay back. So we hear a lot of, I just don't want to go into debt, because a lot of times when students and families think about paying for college, they're thinking about loans, right? But they might be able to receive, over $7,000 in Pell Grants if they will qualify for the maximum amount. And obviously lesser amounts of Pell Grants can still help. So why aren't the students completing a FAFSA? I think there's some really good data from the Department of Education on this. 23% did not have enough information about how to complete a FAFSA. So, almost a quarter of students just don't feel like they understand it. And when you really drill down on some of this data, I think it's important to note that 34% of Hispanic students who did not complete the FAFSA felt that way. 27% of Black students felt that way, and then 18% of white students felt that way. So, that's interesting to know also. There's some equity things going on there, which I know you all, as those in the front lines, are perfectly aware of, but I think this is important to really look at some of those numbers as well. And then we have this 15% that didn't know they could complete a FAFSA. They weren't aware that that was available to them. Oftentimes I talk to students who aren't aware that that applies to community colleges as well, right? Associate's degrees. So doing that education about what is a FAFSA, where can you take that money, can be very important. Also, 9% thought that the FAFSA was too much work or just too time consuming. And we know that it is not necessarily the most fun form ever, right? We know it's not like a party to fill out the FAFSA, but sometimes I feel like families, can overestimate, and it builds up in their minds how difficult it is or how long it's going to take. If students and families are prepared with the documents or have support systems, right, people helping them with the process, oftentimes that FAFSA can take 30 minutes, right? And that's for a first-time completer. Sometimes that's with the data retrieval tool, right? That makes the process a lot more smoothly if folks can access that. But overall, I think that it's not, I'm not meaning to minimize it. I think it is a tricky form, but it doesn't have to take an amazing amount of time. It can be completed in a pretty reasonable amount of time for the rewards in terms of what you qualify for. And one other thing to mention is that colleges and universities themselves are often the largest sources of financial aid. So when you're getting that pushback on, I am not necessarily going to qualify for, federal aid or even state aid, it's helpful to make folks aware that the colleges and universities set their own standards and they have their own funding, right? So they may not qualify for state or federal things, but they might qualify for, college or university, or they might qualify for all of them. It's just hard to know and predict until you go through that process. And this is especially true for that free money, those grants, which I love this image, right? I love the graphic of, yes, that big chunk of that free money, that gift aid is coming from those colleges themselves. And so we know this small investment of time can unlock access to financial aid, and we know the clock is ticking. So something I really have been thinking about is there is a large amount of students who are graduating, right, very soon, it's just around the corner, who also have not filled out the FAFSA, but there's a bunch of them who will fill out the FAFSA in the next year. Okay, so we know from past years that we have tens of thousands of North Carolina students who are graduating from high school and then filling out the FAFSA during that following academic year to attend whatever school. And so I think that is a big target for us to make sure that we're trying to help those students who are ultimately going to complete it and don't realize that completing it later on in the process may translate to less financial opportunities, right? We know that grants can run out. Those college funds, those state funds, even federal funds can run out. So we want to make sure we're just encouraging students who it's just maybe they're just not sure, or they're just on the edge of wanting to complete this form, to actually take action however we can at this point in the year, obviously. And so this is part of this, right, is that we know that almost half of North Carolina college students are their first in their families to attend college. And so those students, when they're in high school, they need more information and support. And so definitely trying to provide that can only benefit all students, but in particular is so needed by the students who don't have those experiences yet in their family. So let's start with talking about some of these data tools. We're going to talk about different ways we can sort of tackle this issue and see if there are any ideas that help y'all to maybe reach some of those students this year. If you're not able to implement this year, I always firmly believe there's going to be a next year. You can try again next year. Do whatever's manageable within your scope right now. Absolutely. I'm just glad you're here listening to some ideas, maybe sharing some ideas in the chat. So we're going to talk about these tools. So we're going to talk about the FAFSA tracker. We're going to talk about the CFNC Pro tools. Also, don't forget about any school-based systems that you might have, right? There may be other data that would make sense to include with those two items. And then we're also going to talk about the graduation survey just a little bit. It's just one of those tools that we know has to happen, right? Especially for you public schools, but I imagine private schools do it too, right? We need to know what the students' plans are. What are they doing next? Well, can we capitalize on that to kind of use that for other purposes since we are already doing it, right? Work smarter, not lot harder. So the first thing I want to talk about is the utility. These are some of the things that I have used in the past and continue to use to some level in my current role. So first, the FAFSA tracker, we're super excited to have that on the CFNC site. I'll show you how to get to that in just a second. But first, let's talk about what are some uses of it, right? So when you're trying to maybe rally the troops, right? If you're trying to enlist the school community and those stakeholders in understanding where y'all are at with your FAFSA numbers at your school, trying to make sure that folks know like what this is where we're at and this is where we want to be. This can be really a powerful way to show exactly what's going on, right? To enlist some of those people in the school community or out in the community at large. It is outward facing data, so folks can access that themselves, but certainly you sharing with that is also a really big benefit. Also comparison data. So, you can look at the different schools in your community. You can compare rates to similar populations. I say this in the spirit of collaboration, right? If you notice that a similar school to yours is, a little bit higher on FAFSA completions, maybe reach out and see, what are you guys doing? Is there anything maybe we can implement? Or are there ways that, if you have similar, data there, maybe you can combine forces with other schools, things like that. So I just want you to think about that as, one tool in your arsenal here. And then of course, professional goal setting. As a school, you may set goals. As a district, there may be goals to set related to FAFSA. And then of course, counselor professional development goals. Like if you want to set a FAFSA goal, you can do that as well. And then once you're done with the big picture data, right, you can kind of look at that finish the FAFSA data, which is the student level data, where you can really do some of those more specific interventions, right? So where are students at with the FAFSA? Are there issues that are preventing it from being complete? Have they not submitted at all? Or are there errors? Are there things that are, sort of stopping the progress in that financial aid system? So combining the finish the FAFSA with other reporting like the RDS, like transcripts or application reports or other school data can really give you a picture of what's going on, not just with individual students, but if there's themes at your school where you can identify some of those gaps so that you can try and tackle those next year or try to intervene now, right? So for interventions. So when you're looking at the FAFSA tracker, if you have not seen it yet on CFNC, you can find it really easily by going to the education professionals section. And it's actually in one of the boxes on the main page. It says FAFSA tools, and you can go to the FAFSA tracker. You can also just type in your web browser that cfnc.org/FAFSA tracker. So it's pretty easily accessible. It is open access. You don't have to be logged into Pro Tools to access that. So that's pretty great. It's just an easy, quick, go in, check it, and you're done. So I would encourage you, if you haven't looked yet, to go ahead and look. What are your completion rates at your school? Feel free to share in the chat if there is something that you're noticing, like for instance, an increase or over last year, or what's going on at your school that brings you here today. What are you looking to tackle with the remaining couple of months? So this is just an example of how the tracker looks, right? And this is what I mean when I say you can look and compare where you're at now to, for the previous year. So you can kind of see your 2023 completion rate, but you can also see those submitted, completed from the previous year. So you can kind of do a little bit of visual comparison, where are we at? So one thing I do like to note, just a logistical thing, I really recommend doing the full screen on the tracker. It just makes it easier to navigate it and to see all the things in the scroll down boxes. So definitely utilize this little box thing in the lower corner. If you can, it's definitely going to help you navigate that tool. And when you're searching, just a couple of little things to note. You can look at you can look at a district. I'm currently in Buncombe County Schools area, so I just kind of looked at that, so you can can see all the schools in that area. If I wanted to do something a little bit more focused, or I can do sort of include or exclude values. So I could include, one school, or I could exclude a couple of schools just to kind of narrow it, right? So if you have traditional schools and sort of less traditional schools or different types of schools in your district, that might be useful to kind of narrow the field a little bit. And of course, you can look at your individual school, and at the bottom is always going to be that if you've selected district, you can see in comparison with the district, right, how your school is doing. All right, so this is the other thing I wanted to make sure you know. You can download these snapshots in the future. It will be, you'll be able to download the data itself into like an Excel spreadsheet, so you can manipulate that data, which can be really helpful for over time tracking, right? But for now, you can at least download this snapshot, which can be helpful to share with those stakeholders. And so we're going to talk about Finish the FAFSA next, but I did want to make sure y'all understand a little bit about that there may be some slight differences between what the tracker says and the Finish the FAFSA says. This note is directly off the FAFSA tools page, so you can read more in depth about this. But just in general, they update on slightly different schedules. The Finish the FAFSA, we need student and family permissions to include them on, so that might account for some data match, things where it's not quite equal. But like my colleague Kathy always says, we encourage you to use the data that you have to get better data, right? To build better data. And so these are all tools that can give you information. None of them are perfect, but they are great tools to use in this process. So just be aware that there may be some slight differences in that. But when you go into that Finish the FAFSA, hopefully you already have access to this. If you do not have access to this, please, please, please go into that Pro Tools Help Desk page and put in that ticket and make sure that you get access. If you work with seniors at your high school, you should definitely have access to this so that you can run these reports, so that you can see exactly where your students are at. We have several, obviously, college reports that can all be very useful in giving the total picture of, college applications and college-bound students. But the Finish the FAFSA is a very particular report that I think is super useful for intervention purposes, right? So you can look at this, and one thing I wanted to show you, and that it's a little thing, but little things excite me. You can see here, I actually searched just 2 letters, and that will pull up any 2 letters in a student's name, which can be helpful because I don't know about y'all, but I have definitely had moments where I'm like, I cannot remember exactly how to spell this student's name. And if I can put those couple of letters together, it will pull up every student that has that combination in there, not just the students who start with that. So that can be a little thing, but I find that super helpful sometimes. I know you guys work with a lot of students, so sometimes that happens. The other thing I want to make sure that you know is that you can sort this information, right? You can definitely download it. I'm all for downloading and combining data to give a complete picture. But even if you're not downloading, you can still sort by student name. You can sort by any of these categories to really effectively use that list, especially when you have a big school. If this report has multiple pages, that can really help you narrow down on, what are we really looking at? How many students are flagged for verification? Perhaps you can do an intentional group intervention with those students, right? You can meet with them one-on-one. You can talk to, students or families one-on-one, but if they're all flagged for verification, maybe there's a way that you can sort of give similar information to each student, right, based on this kind of reporting. So there's some things that can really help in here. And I really want you to think about, are there trends that you're noticing in your data that can help you to use your time effectively, right? Are there ways that you can send like the same note or give some similar information to students who are in similar scenarios, right? Not all of what you do obviously is going to be, applicable to every student, but are there ways that you can can kind of work smarter, not harder, because I know your time is valuable and I know that y'all get interrupted, right? When you're trying to do stuff. So if you can kind of simplify that process, I think that can definitely help. Also, I just wanted to remind you, because of course, residency in North Carolina is also tied to that financial aid. So it's a form that I think is really important to talk about in this process. So I just want to remind you that the RDS completion report is in the Pro Tools. Now it is separate from the Finish the FAFSA. So I do like to make sure you understand that this one is pulled a different way. So if a student is not showing on the RDS completion report, it likely means that they have not connected their CFNC account to your school, okay? So whereas the Finish the FAFSA kind of comes from that DPI data, this one comes from within CFNC. And so a student has to have connected with that high school in their profile in order for you to access their data. So just keep that in mind in order to, you know, sort of make sure that you're seeing what you need to see in there. And a couple of things. So a no could mean, you know, when you're looking at RDS determination complete, a no can mean it's in progress or not started. Unfortunately, the way that the RDS application works is the student has 25 days to kind of complete that RDS application once they've started it. So sometimes they may have started it, but then they have to start over again. So it's just something to keep in mind. And also how I really want you to think about, how do you use and or share data at your school, right? So I've talked about a couple of different reports that we have access to. I'm sure you have others local to you or that you use. Is there, you know, when you combine that data, so something I've experienced at schools that I've worked at and I've seen other schools do is, you know, sort of have a senior Google spreadsheet, right? And that is shared with multiple stakeholders. Of course, this is locked, right? So that it's intentionally shared with those who should have access to it. But that can be a really helpful way, especially when you have a lot of students, a lot of, you know, partners in the mix, or, you know, people that you want to make sure are in the loop on what's going on with specific students and their graduation progress and their post-graduation plans. You can share that document and have different categories for notes and things, you know, some of those conversations that have happened or where a student's at with different things, rather than reinventing the wheel, right? Because we know that students will come into a counseling office or come meet with a college advisor, having had a conversation with someone else in the office, and you have to kind of dig through and reiterate that. So is there a way that you can kind of have this data in a place where it is shared with folks that can help with this process? And we'll talk about some ideas for some partners, but I really do think that can be a helpful way to make it, you know, sort of a village that is tackling the support of the students and in your care. So let's talk about some specific initiatives and interventions, right? So we've talked about the data piece, you know, what you're looking at data for, what you can, you know, sort of gather from some of that data. But these are sort of the specific things with FAFSA interventions that we have to keep in mind at this point, right? So there's three broad categories of students at this point: the not submitted, the submitted, and the completed. But there's some subsections, right? Which, because of course, you know, it has to be a little bit more complicated than that. Most things are. So not submitted, we have that eligible to submit and has not submitted, right? Those are the folks that we talked about before with, you know, there's probably a good chunk of those students who are going to submit in the next year, and if they can be encouraged to submit earlier, might have access to additional funding for college. So that's a great target population. We'll talk about some things that we might do for that. There's also the not eligible, right? It's, you know, it's not FAFSA for FAFSA's sake. It's not, you know, everybody is eligible to complete FAFSA, but you know, there are some folks that are not eligible to complete FAFSA. So how do we then support those students, right? Because those students may still be able to access that college education. They may still have goals on that end, but may not know how they can move forward to finding that financial aid. And then some students have another plan, right? We have students who are going directly into the workforce. We have many students who are going into the military. So there's some students that have another plan, and that's okay. If they have a plan, that's great. That's why we try to create these spreadsheets, though, so we can identify, okay, we know, okay, this student is doing this, they have a plan. However, I will say it's never a bad idea to encourage a plan B, right? So for those students who do have another plan, if something happens, right? If something happens where they should have to pivot, because real life happens and throws us for a loop sometimes, it's never a bad idea if they're willing to fill out the FAFSA just to have that in there, right? Just to have that backup option that's already filled out for them if they decide to attend a community college or attend a four-year university in the next year. And then we've got the group that's submitted but not completed, right? So in that FAFSA, finish the FAFSA report, those are the main differences that we see is like the submitted and the completed, right? So submitted means there's something that's not quite right. Right? So there may be errors, there may be a need for verification. And so that report is going to be super helpful in supporting those students, because those students, although they have submitted that form, they're still in the not submitted column in some ways, right? In terms of how much financial aid they're qualifying for at this moment, because that form cannot be considered until it's completed, right? So those two columns are really sort of, we need to push forward on those two in particular at this point. And then of course, we've got the students who have completed, right? They've completed their FAFSA, but there's still other things that need to happen before they can actually finally access that financial aid. So talking to them about, the student aid report, making sure to check that so they understand that, making sure that they're getting those financial aid offers, reaching out to financial aid offices if needed to kind of understand some of those. And then of course, appeals. If a student needs to appeal or request professional judgment for any reason, right? So there's a lot of things that still have to happen or could happen after the FAFSA is actually completed to make sure students are accessing the maximum amount of aid that they would qualify for. So let's talk about partners, okay? I really do think that y'all are amazing. I really do. School counselors, college access professionals, you are working so hard for students. And I really encourage you to try to partner and collaborate in ways that make sense in your community, because I do believe that many hands make light work. And sometimes other school or community partners can come at things from an angle or from a connection that they have with students and families that we don't necessarily have. So, this is a part of trying to, create successful interventions for students, is using those partners strategically that you can. And every area has them, but most areas have different ones, right? So it's hard to say generally who are the best partners in an area. So this part, I've got a lot of things listed, and I'm going to talk about some of these, but I really would love for you all to list in the chat, where do you find your most effective partnerships to supporting students? And maybe some of those partnerships that you have are partnerships for other purposes, but that can be used for FAFSA as well, or financial aid, or the college going process. So think also about the partner's strengths, right? So not all partners are necessarily going to be the partners that are meeting with students. Sometimes it's the behind the scenes. Like, I love the technology people in the schools, like the media specialists, the technology coaches. Sometimes it's just a teacher or a counselor that's great with technology, and using them to help with some of these things like the data tracking, or using them to help set up systems, right, that can sort of help with the process, so that you can get information out to students and you can track that information. So that's one way, one example of how not all partners are necessarily going to be front facing with students, but there's a lot of partners that can definitely play an important role in this. Now, there are a lot of school and district-based partners that absolutely can, and I would like to think should be interfacing and talking to students about their next steps and their plans for going to college and or paying for college, right? So, are there administrators, teachers, athletic coaches, right, that have connections with those students, social workers, right? We know social workers work with some specific populations, some specific students that may in particular not have access to information, may not be really invested or knowledgeable about the process, but that social worker may have worked with them and can kind of talk with them. So are there partners in the school that you can sort of cross-train on this process? Even if you're not able to cross-train those partners, can you invite them to some of the CFNC events so they can learn a little bit more about some of these things, right? We know that these folks care about kids, and kind of capitalizing on that and helping them to be more knowledgeable in some of those things that students need to know and need help with can be really effective. Student partners are, of course, amazing in any process, because the students care about other students, and there's definitely a clout, right, that comes with including students. So can you capitalize on student organizations? I love using juniors for things related to the college process, because it just gives them sort of a preview of what to do the next year. But certainly other senior students who are leaders, getting their voice out there. How can you capitalize on that, that student clout to encourage students to connect with resources, to connect with the FAFSA, financial aid, all that. Former students, having former students come back, I love that as well. We know that a lot of our students who went to college last year, right, are coming home from college at the end of this year. They come home for breaks. Can you capitalize on them coming in and talking to students about, what did they maybe receive from doing the FAFSA? Did they get great financial aid? How has that benefited their life, right, from doing that? So really capitalize on those opportunities. And then just don't forget about families, right? So we have a couple of different things. You can obviously sort of try to work with the PTA, the Booster Club. Are there ways that they can support evening events or daytime events, or childcare, food? Those are all things that oftentimes can really help students and families to connect with an event, to come to an event and have that availability if they know that there's going to be support for them at that event. Of course, higher education partners, all of those folks, the TRIO programs that may be in your school, like college advisors, definitely utilize them. And then one organization grouping that I think is really underutilized by many educators and school systems are, some of those community partners, right? Those nonprofit partners, even, business partners, individual businesses, faith-based organizations, but also chambers of commerce, regional councils, right? There's a lot of conversation about FAFSA right now, and not just in our educational systems. It's also in workforce development corners, right? So this is a great time to connect with those partners to see if you can't come up with mutually beneficial goals, right, to help support students in this financial aid journey. So one example I did want to highlight, we have a partnership out here in the Land of Sky. I'm out in the Western region here. And so I wanted to just kind of showcase that there are a lot of local education attainment collaboratives. You may have heard about them maybe in the past couple of years through My Future NC. And I just wanted to remind you by showing you this map that these might be organizations who might be excited to partner with their local schools for FAFSA initiatives, right? In particular, I've been working really closely with the Land of Sky P20 Council. So the P20 Council, it's like pre-K through 20 graduation and beyond, grade 20 and beyond. And so we're focused on some FAFSA things in addition to the work that they do at all levels. We're focused on some FAFSA things. So we've got, they provide a FAFSA pack, which is basically some signs, some tools, some candies, some games, some FAFSA trivia, things like that, some fun things to support FAFSA events. And all of the schools, all the public schools in the region can check this out for free. right? We're also working on a FAFSA sweepstakes, right? So this is going to be one of our end of year initiatives, like a last ditch, sort of try to bring up some of those FAFSA numbers. So this is something that we're working on locally. And it's basically an April push, okay? So the month of April, we have prizes for students. It's going to be like a lottery-based system. And so students who, from these four participating high schools, students who submit the FAFSA, connect it to their high school, and connect it to our local community college, AB Tech, are going to be entered into a raffle drawing for a $100 gift card, like a Visa gift card. So that is a really awesome opportunity. We couldn't have done that without the Land of Sky partnership, because they're producing that funding, and supporting with obviously the organization of this whole event, and then also the partnership with AB Tech, right? So that community college. Just by sheer numbers, we know that a lot of the students who have not filled out the FAFSA at this point during the year are going to be community college students or candidates. It's a great opportunity to get them that first step into college, whether they complete a degree there or they move on to and transfer to a four-year, or whatever it is that they would like to do. We just know that a lot of those students would be applying to AB Tech anyways, right? And so it's not connected to enrollment. It's just, did they connect that FAFSA to that local community college? And those folks in the financial aid office, they're going to run those reports, and then we will have a raffle for multiple $100 prizes to go to the students and families who complete the FAFSA during the month of April. So this is just one example of something that you can do. Obviously, this is money, but are there other prizes, right, that you can offer? We know that money is not necessarily the magic bullet with students, right? There may be other prizes that you can offer related to prom tickets, or extra graduation tickets or whatnot. There's a lot of prizes that students find very valuable. Oh, free yearbook. I've seen that one for sure. So there's definitely a lot of options there. And, when you have an initiative like this, of course we want to provide support. So we're providing a lot of support. We've got at least one school that's planning to do another FAFSA day. The other schools have done in-person FAFSA days. And at this point, they feel like doing virtual is a good option. So we've got some, I took on some Calendly appointments. The local community college is taking on financial aid appointments. Of course, the college advisors, Gear Up, that we have in different schools, they're taking on some of this as well. So we're just trying to do that last April push before sort of May sweeps everybody away, right? Into the whole end of year testing, graduation, and all that. So we're trying to do this last push. We've talked about that if this is a successful initiative, it might be good to do it at a different time during the year, or maybe spread it out during the year. There's a lot of options, but we're just trying to implement one thing and just kind of move forward with it and see how it goes. But I'm really excited about it. And so one thing I would encourage you to think about is, are there school and community partners that you can cross-train for things like this, right? So we've talked to the financial aid office at AB Tech, and they actually have somebody who works part-time in their financial aid office and also is at the info desk at this. So that's a really great opportunity for that person to be, at the info desk and still answering some of those questions. We've also talked about, like, are there places that might handle taxes, community organizations that already handle tax information, or immigration information, right, to help with different students who might have more complicated FAFSA situations due to mixed immigration statuses, right? So who are those organizations? I think it's important for us to continually be thinking like, oh, could we partner with this organization in our area? Of course, we're also providing lots of resources. You all will receive this PowerPoint, so don't worry, you don't have to be furiously writing these down. I just wanted you to know these are some things that we're sending out to the schools to share with those students. We have printed flyers, printed posters, things like that, but we also have a lot of these research sources sent to the counselors and also shared on a Facebook event page. So we're trying to get lots of resources to help folks if they want to do it on their own, and also support with an actual person one-on-one if needed. So then that brings me to that FAFSA eligibility. So since we know that not all students are eligible to complete the FAFSA, how can we perhaps connect those students with other opportunities, right? Non-FAFSA opportunities or outside organizations. So these are some that I, hear about and I've used, and they're just fantastic resources. So Latinx Ed and College y Consejos. So College y Consejos is students can get one-on-one support, right? Any Latino student in the state can call and get support with the college process. So that's one-on-one. And Latinx Ed, generally, the organization that houses College y Consejos, has a great list of scholarships, right, for those students. So there's a lot out there to kind of access statewide, but there's also local organizations. In this area, we have an organization called True Ridge that work with the community, but also with education partners. SoMuchPotential.org is also a really great site to utilize. Community college partners, right? There's always some, in my experience, we have some great community college partners to help walk these students through opportunities that they might qualify for at the community college. And then also just think about North Carolina Promise programs, right? We know that it's a $1,000 tuition in-state, but there's also a discount for out-of-state. So even if a student does not qualify for in-state tuition, it's still going to be more affordable than out-of-state tuition at another UNC system school. And of course, it's not on here, and I apologize for that, but the independent colleges, reach out to them because they have different funding opportunities as well. And of course, we have CFNC and Espanol playlists. We have handouts. There's lots of information for these students. So definitely, sort of reach out to those partners, can really work with and support those students. You can work with them, of course, but like I said, many hands. It takes a village to help a lot of these students. Okay, then next we have the verification crowd, right? So if a student's selected for verification, they may not realize it. If they haven't looked at their student aid report, they may, need further support with knowing what they need to get. But the big thing is just encouraging students to call those financial aid offices with questions, whether that's calling with you, right? Maybe they come in your office and you call together, right? So sometimes the barrier is that nervousness of calling those financial aid offices. But also getting the information out about what are some things that maybe they can try and locate, or what does this look like? It's not anything that they did wrong is the biggest thing, right? So often students and families think, oh, we did something wrong and we're going to be in trouble, and that is not the case, right? And then just going forward, making sure everybody who's eligible to uses that data retrieval tool, because that's really going to minimize incidents of that happening. Then, of course, errors. Now, hopefully you don't see too many of these errors because, hopefully this isn't coming up too often. But when you do see those error codes, that's usually going to require a little bit more of a one-on-one conversation, either with the student or the parent, just because it tends to be a very specific issue, right? Not every error is quite the same. So just doing outreach to those students and families can be very, very helpful to kind of just help them navigate this process and knowing what to do. One thing is that most items can be amended on that FAFSA form. Some cannot, right? So like social security number error, things like that can't be amended on the form itself. But even if it can be amended on the FAFSA form, I always recommend those students and families call the financial aid office to confirm, right? The financial aid office can make the change, for them in many cases as well. So calling financial aid offices is always a really big go-to strategy in my book. Also, make sure students understand the student aid report, especially if they're completing the FAFSA late in the year. Make sure they know to look out for that, right? And then also just one big thing is to make sure they're really checking those portals, those emails. I think we know this, right? It's super frustrating to many of us in education that students aren't getting the messages that are coming through that are meant to help them, right? So that's one of the biggest things that if there's any way we can hammer that in, make sure they're checking that information, because colleges may need additional information as well. All right, and then we have the special circumstances. So I also want you to know that, you know, you can call those financial aid offices. I want students to know they can call these financial aid offices at any time to request a professional judgment or sort of an appeal based on need. And you know, a lot of families, they look at what they qualify for and they're like, gosh, that's just not doable for me. You know, we have this other thing, you know, maybe it's like they're taking care of their grandparents and they're considered dependents, but they didn't put them on the FAFSA. There's so many things that can happen in a family's financial life that really can make, you know, make things a little bit more difficult to pay for college. So reaching out to the financial aid office, asking those questions of some things that, oh, is this something that can be considered, you know, can be really beneficial. It doesn't hurt, certainly. And then I've heard of students asking this general question that I just love. Is there anything that I would be eligible for that I haven't yet applied for? And so sometimes the answer is no, but you know, if that no is the worst that can happen, you know, I really love that question. I love the idea of asking, you know, asking, is there anything left that I have missed? So this is just a list of a lot of things that are kind of that last final details of wrapping up the process, right, for financial aid, for going to college. I'm not going to read through all these. Many of these you probably already know, but I wanted to provide a list of some things to consider that maybe might be worth sharing with students, like have students done this, that, and the other thing at this point. Now, how can you perhaps get that information out? So this is sort of one of the last, like, okay, what are our last minute, you know, what can we do to get those graduated seniors this last minute information to kind of carry them forward into the world, into the summer, into college, into wherever they're going? So are there ways you can make a targeted all call? So of course there's an all call that can go to all seniors, it can go to all students, but is there a way to actually narrow that, right? Can you provide your data manager with a list that can kind of target that in PowerSchool or whatever other system you use? That might be a good way to get out some of that specific information for specific groups of students. And we've mentioned before the graduation survey, the senior survey. Are there ways that you can strategically ask questions about FAFSA and financial aid in addition to that and those next steps? So certainly if you're using Google Forms, there's sort of a skip logic you can embed in there where if a student answers that yes, they're attending college, you know, then you can trigger other questions to go down the line. Or if you're old school and you're not able to necessarily do that piece of the process or find somebody who can do that for you, you can always just say, if you're planning to go to college, have you? You know, you can do it the old-fashioned way, you can do it a little bit more complicated, but I do think it's worth getting those questions out there. You know, obviously you already have some data about this, but I think it's also helpful to have students think about, have I done this, right? So even if the answer is yes, you know, if the answer is yes, then you can provide additional information. Have you done this? Have you checked this? Have you, that sort of thing. Google can also send responses to students. So that can kind of create a checklist of sorts, right? So based on the yeses and nos that they've done, they can have a printout or they can have an email that says, oh gosh, I haven't done this, I haven't done this. And so they can use that as a list of what they need to wrap up, to follow up on. If you can collect those student email addresses, those personal email addresses for a follow-up by category based on that data, right? I'm all about getting that data, seeing if you can kind of work smarter, right? Try to get information to groups of students that makes sense. And then of course, you know, are there other ways that you can get that information out? So is there a senior graduation checklist that you all already get out? What are you already doing at the end of the year where you can target those students? Is there a senior day or a senior meeting, graduation practice? And then once they're gone, maybe putting things on your website that can help, you know, funnel them to support once you have left for the year and they've graduated, right? Maybe you could put the link to our Life After FAFSA, What's Next, or one of our just general financial aid webinars that's on YouTube on there. You could link some information on your school site or your counseling site that's related to financial aid in general. You can put our financial aid widget on there. So you can find those in Education Professionals and you can add that to your website. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of do some of these things. I know we are running out of time, so I did want to just go ahead and close with, hopefully you've gotten some ideas for what to do next. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Kathy to wrap us all up.
Thank you, Devin. If you don't mind just keeping your slides up and going to the save the date so we let folks know what's coming up. So if people need to drop off, they can. Oops,
I
did
don't
we
know if I
lose your
have
sharing?
this save the date.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, so if you stop sharing, I can
Sorry about that.
share. One of the questions that came through from Levon is how did you fund the activity that you were talking about?
Yeah, so that was part of the reason that I really wanted to highlight those educational collaboratives, because some of them have funding, grant funding, where they have to focus those funds on FAFSA completion, right? And so this was a partnership between that organization, the Land of Sky P20 Council, and AB Tech and myself. So they're bringing that funding to see, can this work? And if it doesn't work, probably won't get funding for that specific activity next year, but we're giving it a try. We're just trying to see if that can support those students. Often we know that many of our lower income students are last to finish the FAFSA, so maybe those students really do need a little bit of a money boost at this time.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love if you have a local education foundation in your community, that's their mission, is to support the public schools and their various activities. So I'd reach out to them. If you have a community foundation in your community, they're another resource for funding. United Way sometimes will. And then a lot of times local parents and their business can be a support for some activity. So you just never know. I am always one looking for money. So, okay, I know we're wrapping up. I just want to let folks know we are doing another round of the FAFSA tools training this Friday. I know Devin shared a lot of great tips with you today. Data is probably the thing I get asked about most, so we will make sure we touch on that on Friday. Our Spanish speaking team is doing a few different sessions on paying for college for Spanish speaking families. You can go to the CFNC.org events page to share that with your Spanish speaking families. So I want to encourage that. And somebody was asking about the new FAFSA, and the date is most likely getting moved out. That is looking to be the case. I don't have the registration link set up yet, but we have a save the date for May 17th, 9 to 11. I'm so thrilled to be bringing Morley Keller from the National College Attainment Network. Put your running shoes on, take lots of notes. We'll make sure we share the slides, but she's going to be sharing what we know so far in terms of what's changing with the FAFSA. Obviously, a lot of changes are coming, and we will start sharing those out, as early as we know them. We're going to get through this. Next year, seniors won't know that it's any different from what we know, but there will be some changes. And so we want to make sure we're there for you. We'll be between May and into next year, we'll be bringing you new information as we know it so that you can be prepared. The good or bad about it moving back to December 1st is we have a little more time to prepare given the number of changes that are coming. So with that, I know we're a couple minutes over, but thank you, Devin. Always a wealth of information, so many great tools and tips there and ideas and resources. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we will see you at one of our sessions that are coming up. Have a great day, everyone.